support of the dark economy should have both diplomatic and trade consequences. Third, we should strengthen effective programs to combat trade-based money laundering, like the Department of Homeland Security's trade transparency units. The department has agreements with 18 partner nations, which let U.S. law enforcement and their international counterparts generate actionable leads against criminal organizations involved in trade-based money laundering. Costing about $200,000 each to implement, trade transparency units are net revenue raisers and should be expanded and encouraged to share data with relevant U.S. counterparts to the extent allowable under bilateral agreements. Fourth, we must close loopholes cartels use to launder their illicit proceeds. For instance, in the real estate sector, or with investment advisors, or even via stored value instruments like gift cards. The administration should start by making geographic targeting orders permanent, nationwide, and applicable to commercial real estate, by imposing reporting requirements on investment advisors, and by implementing a final rule subjecting stored value cards to cross-border reporting requirements. Congress can help strengthen and modernize our anti-money laundering framework. Co-Chair Grassley and I have introduced the Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Finance, and Counterfeiting Act of 2022 to increase penalties for commonly used money laundering methods like bulk cash smuggling and tax evasion, and provide additional tools to keep up with newer techniques such as those used by Chinese money laundering organizations. And finally, we need to make better use of sanctions. Through the Russian elites, proxies, and oligarchs program and the Klepto Capture Task Force, we have seen the power of sanctions. I am pleased that the Office of National Drug Control Policy in its 2022 National Drug Control Strategy calls to increase the number of individuals and entities targeted as transnational criminal organization enablers through sanctions by 365% by 2025. Good, go get them. Cartels who exploit our financial system and those who enable them to do so are complicit in the nearly 108,000 drug overdose deaths that occurred in the United States in 2021. It is both a health and a national security imperative that the federal government dismantle the vast international dark economy that enables drug trafficking organizations' illicit finance. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about their agencies' respective roles in doing so. However, I must note my disappointment with the Department of Justice for its refusal to provide a witness for this hearing, despite ample notice. As the sole prosecuting agency for narcotics and money laundering cases, its testimony would have been valuable to this caucus. This seems to be an unfortunately persistent problem for the department, very different from other executive agencies. And with that, I turn it over to Co-Chair Grassley.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to agree with you on what you just said about the Justice Department not coming to this hearing. It's too often that we get that as an answer, not only for our drug caucus meeting, but also sometimes for the judiciary hearing. Today's hearing offers us a very good opportunity to continue our focus on drug trafficking organizations and how to combat them. The revenue generated by cartels is very, very massive. The illicit drug market's valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars per year, and of course, with no sign of slowing down. Once cartels get their hands on dirty money, it's very quickly moved and laundered so criminals can profit from their crimes, and they do profit. The dirty money cartels count on is part of a larger international financial network. Cartels are known to be partners with professional money laundering organizations, including those based in China, to execute and profit from their criminal schemes. Drug trafficking organizations also launder money through American financial system in new ways. E-commerce cryptocurrency, convoluted shell companies. Following and targeting the money is an important piece of the fight against cartels and the scourge of drug trafficking. But we can't minimize the importance of drug enforcement and stopping the supply of drugs into our country. After all, money laundering doesn't exist without drug trafficking. Our drug crisis has been fueled by a steady flow of deadly drugs, including fentanyl, coming across our borders. Just this weekend, a record 5,000 pounds of meth was seized in Southern California, and the results are then that tens of thousands of overdose deaths in America each year happen. Precursor chemicals for lethal drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine are produced in China, shipped to Mexico, where these cartels in Mexico make the fentanyl. The deadly drugs are then taken across the southwest border, where they're distributed throughout our great country. This triangle of deaths among China, Mexico, and the United States show that organized drug traffickers don't respect or stop at international borders, because if they did, they wouldn't be successful. So we find them pushing their deadly trades. Dirty drug money also motivates and empowers cartels to commit crimes that is and are more violent and spreads corruption. Drug trafficking organizations use dirty money to buy aerial drones so that they can fly deadly drugs across our border, which is why I introduced the bipartisan Drone Act of 2022 to combat this new threat, which our colleague Senator Hassan co-sponsors. It's clear that we need more tools to fight sophisticated transnational criminal organizations. We can do this by modernizing and strengthening our laws to beef up our drug enforcement and money laundering tools. Earlier this year, I reintroduced a piece of legislation I entitled Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing, and Counterfeiting Act. I'm glad to say that Senator Whitehouse is my Democratic lead sponsor and that Senator Cornyn is an original co-sponsor. This legislation will improve law enforcement here today are witnesses from two agencies, the State Department and the Treasury Department. I'm thankful to Senator Whitehouse for arranging these witnesses to be here. I also appreciate Senator Whitehouse and I coordinated to have a DOJ witness here, but they refused. I'm disappointed that the Department of Justice, the key federal agency charged with investigating and prosecuting drug money laundering crimes, refused to send a witness to this important hearing. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you to Chairman Whitehouse for this hearing. I look forward to the testimony and opportunity to ask questions.
Thanks very much, Co-Chair Grassley, and I'm delighted to see Senators Blumenthal and Cornyn have joined us. I'll now take a moment to introduce our two witnesses. Brian Nelson is the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence at the Department of the Treasury. Prior to joining Treasury, he was the Chief Legal Officer at the Organizing Committee for the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and previously served in government as the Senior Policy Advisor, Policy Chief, and General Counsel in California's Department of Justice, where maybe they sent somebody to show up for hearings at the legislature. Anyway, he oversaw key national security initiatives, including efforts to combat transnational criminal organizations, highly relevant to this hearing, dismantle human trafficking networks, and build state and international partnerships to stop money laundering and high-tech crimes. I'll call on you in 1 second, Brian, but I want to also introduce Ambassador Todd Robinson, who's the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs at the State Department. Ambassador Robinson has served in a number of capacities at the State Department, including as Senior Advisor for Central America in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, as the Charge in Caracas, Venezuela, and as the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Guatemala, a position previously held many, many years previously by my grandfather when they called it minister and not ambassador. And because of Ambassador Robinson's Rhode Island history, I had the honor of introducing him for his hearing for that position. So I'm excited to see him back here and acknowledge him as a career minister in the State Department. Undersecretary Nelson, why don't you go first for 5 minutes, and then we'll turn to Ambassador Robinson.
Thank you so much, Chairman Whitehouse, Chairman Grassley, distinguished members of this caucus. I'm very much thankful for this invitation to speak today on behalf of the Treasury Department about this critical national security issue. I'm also pleased to be here aside my colleague from the Department of State, with whom we work closely on counter-narcotics priorities. The Treasury Department has long recognized the threat from money laundering linked to drug trafficking. We are key implementers of the President's National Drug Control Strategy, which identifies counter-illicit finance as a critical pillar to degrade and disrupt transnational criminal organizations. We pursue a multi-pronged strategy against these threats, which encompasses understanding risks and mapping TCO financial networks, imposing measures on financial institutions. These include reporting suspicious activity, which directly leads to information for law enforcement, public-private partnerships to facilitate robust information sharing, the use of targeted financial sanctions to identify and cut off TCOs, their members, their supporters from the international financial system, closing outstanding regulatory gaps, and working with international partners. Of course, drug overdose deaths here in the United States are exacting a terrible toll on American families with, as you noted, an estimated 108,000 deaths in 2021, which is an increase of 15% from the previous year. But such numbers do not only represent a public health crisis, as you said, they also represent a threat to U.S. national and economic security. As documented in the 2022 National Money Laundering Risk Assessment, the movement and laundering of drug proceeds in the United States continues to be dominated by traditional methods and techniques such as bulk cash smuggling, trade-based money laundering, and others. Law enforcement is seeing an increase in TCO's use of Chinese money laundering organizations. These offer services at lower fees than traditional money brokers. They exploit Chinese currency controls and use communication technology effectively. TCOs are also growing comfortable with darknet markets and the use of digital assets to launder funds, although our assessment is the size and scope of this activity remains low in comparison to cash-based retail street sales. In order to address these challenges, we're undertaking several high-impact actions. The measures we require of certain private sector entities, including due diligence, record keeping, and reporting requirements, provide the basis for law enforcement investigation of all manner of illegal activity, including drug trafficking. This information also informs the use of sanctions authorities, which are among our most effective tools for targeting the command, control, and financial facilitation infrastructure of TCOs worldwide. The President's December 2021 Executive Order, EO 14059, imposing sanctions on persons involved in the global illicit drug trade, will support the administration's priority to disrupt the operation of the drug cartels who direct the supply of illicit drugs to U.S. markets. The EO affords our Office of Foreign Assets Control greater flexibility to sanction foreign actors involved in narcotics trafficking that threaten U.S. national security. Our first tranche of designations under this expanded authority was in December of 2021, and they targeted TCOs based in Brazil, China, Colombia, and Mexico. The financial intelligence we collect also informs our efforts to close regulatory gaps in order to ensure the US AML CFT framework is fit for purpose in addressing an evolving threat environment. As you are aware, Treasury is currently undertaking rulemaking to implement key provisions of the Corporate Transparency Act to deny illicit actors the ability to hide behind anonymous front and shell companies. Another priority in this category is addressing how drug traffickers exploit the US real estate market. Our Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is pursuing a rulemaking process to address how criminal actors exploit the US real estate sector by bringing greater transparency to non-finance transactions. Another important component of our counter-narcotics strategy is international engagement, as you both noted. My first trip as undersecretary was to Mexico, and this was an essential opportunity to build relationships with key counterparts. While there, I met with public and private sector partners to discuss ways to enhance our collaboration on counter-narcotics, human smuggling, and anti-corruption. We will also continue to support ongoing administration efforts to engage China on counter-narcotics, including encouraging and pressing Beijing to curtail the illicit diversion of Chinese origin precursor chemicals to Mexican drug cartels. So long as major criminal organizations either use or threaten the US financial system, the Treasury Department will maintain these significant lines of efforts. So with that, I'll close by thanking the caucus again for your support, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary. And now let me turn to Ambassador Robinson.
Chairman Whitehouse, Co-Chairman Grassley, and distinguished members of the caucus, thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today and to join my good friend Brian Nelson, the Undersecretary at Treasury, regarding the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement efforts to attack the financial networks of cartels. Disrupting the illicit finance of cartels is essential to reduce the devastating impact of illicit narcotics on the United States. This is integral to INL's mission to keep Americans safe by countering threats from crime, illegal drugs, and instability abroad. Cartels are modernized and diversified. They finance their criminal enterprises trafficking not only plant-based drugs, but also precursor chemicals. Along with fueling corruption, they are involved with highly profitable synthetic drug manufacturing, trafficking and smuggling of humans and wildlife, network hacking, and illicit mining. They have access to global supply chains and markets combined with their local influence in areas with weak governance structures and instability. The result has been devastating. Drug overdoses were responsible for over 100,000 deaths in the United States last year. Synthetic opioids, especially fentanyl, are now the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Most illicit fentanyl is manufactured in or trafficked through Mexico, but the challenge of chemical control is global. The through line to all of it is money. Tackling illicit finance is one way the administration is assisting our international partners to counter criminal groups. Over the last 3 fiscal years, INL has programmed and implemented approximately $85 million in funds to address illicit finance related to narcotics. INL accomplishes this through 4 main prongs. First, INL, along with the Treasury, the Department of Justice, and other U.S. government partners, and other U.S. government entities, partners to support international standards from bodies such as the Financial Action Task Force. Second, we work with partner governments to strengthen legal and regulatory regimes and reduce vulnerabilities. Third, INL mobilizes technical expertise to enable partners to respond to emerging threats, including digital assets such as cryptocurrencies and vulnerable sectors like online gambling and illicit mining. Finally, INL manages corruption-related visa restrictions targeting individuals connected with illicit finance and programs championing anti-corruption efforts. In the Western Hemisphere, INL assistance promotes effective justice systems non-conviction-based asset forfeiture to counter illicit finance networks, including those connected to newer cartel revenue sources like illicit mining, powerful tools to thwart cartels and combat corruption. In the Asia Pacific region, in response to the surge in drug trafficking and illicit proceeds, INL increased assistance to East and Southeast Asia to enhance capacity to investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate financial crimes, money laundering, and drug trafficking. INL also leverages multilateral anti-corruption bodies, including the United Nations, Organization of American States, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and G20 to press countries to implement anti-corruption and anti-money laundering obligations and standards. To reinforce our diplomacy and assistance, INL aggressively deploys deterrence tools like visa restrictions and rewards programs granted us by Congress. Cartels and transnational criminals will continue to develop new means to launder money. Consistent with the President's budget request, INL needs resources flexible enough to outpace evolving threats. We must remain nimble in our ability to meet emerging and future money laundering and other illicit financing operations. We are confident that U.S. investment in building partner capacity results not only in stronger laws and more robust institutions, but also to ultimately save lives and keep Americans safe at home. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador Robinson. Undersecretary Nelson, are you comfortable with the 365% sanctions increase goal set by the National Drug Control Strategy?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Obviously, our commitment and my commitment is to increasing the number of counter narcotics sanctions using EO 14059, excuse me. But more than the numbers, we're really focused on targeting high impact targets in order to make a real strategic impact. And that is reflected in the work that we've done in terms of evaluating our sanctions authorities and implementing better practices to ensure they're efficient and effective.
So you
in that
signed
context,
off on the 365% goal set by the drug control strategy.
I'm focused on increasing the strategic effect of our sanctions and increasing the numbers. We're absolutely going to increase the efforts using the new tool under the executive order that we have 100%. There's no question about that. But what I've really been focused on is prioritizing fentanyl and synthetic opioids networks by dedicating significant investigative resources to that particular problem set, which again is less about the numbers, but making sure that we're having strategic effect.
You mentioned that the beneficial ownership regs are, you're currently engaged in those. You've been currently engaged
Very
in
much so.
for a very long time now. Will you be wrapped up this year?
Yeah, so one thing is we are currently very much engaged. As you know, we did our notice of proposed rulemaking of December of 2021 on the reporting rule, which is the first piece of the 3 beneficial ownership rulemakings. We've now received hundreds of comments, and we're working through those as rapidly as possible because we view this as a critical piece in developing transparency and an ability to obviously prevent the use of our system by drug trafficking organizations and a number of other illicit actors. So it is a priority.
Well, I'm sure I can speak for Chairman Grassley, who is my co-author, that we'd love to see you guys get this piece of work finished up.
I would only 2 points. Just thank you for that. It is incredibly important to our work. And second, in order to effectively implement it, once we have these regs in place, like I said, we are working on as quickly as possible. We're going to need, FinCEN is going to need resources in order to implement it effectively.
Yeah. Well, we got you an additional 22 million.
And we thank you for that. We thank you for that. And that's
in May. And I had a lot to do with getting that there because we're pushing hard on the klepto capture stuff, and you're an important piece of that effort.
And we very much thank you for that.
Senator Grassley and I have the Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Finance, and Counterfeiting Act of 2022. Would that help you better attack financial networks, and do you support that bill?
So recognizing that our staffs have, I think, been in close contact and going through the bill, we certainly, and also recognizing that it primarily impacts jurisdictions of Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security. We do agree that it makes important strides towards remedying deficiency in the U.S. AML regime, absolutely, and we're happy to keep working on it with you.
On GTOs, we've seen, Pablo Escobar hid money in the U.S. in real estate. A Mexican governor tied to cartels has been caught with a lot of money invested in U.S. real estate from Texas to Delaware. What do you need to do to expand GTOs nationwide so that this doesn't happen, so that they just can't get around the localities where the GTOs operate and go to ones where they know perfectly well they're not operating? How do we solve that?
So we've put out an advance notice of public rulemaking on this question. We agree that GTOs are temporary and obviously have limited geographic reach. We support a permanent regulatory solution to address that problem of anonymity in the real estate sector. So our next step will be to publish a draft regulation and a notice of proposed rulemaking.
Good. Keep moving.
Thanks.
Ambassador Robinson, one of the president's signature proposals has been the Democracy Initiative, now underway. The Democracy Initiative pushes at kleptocracy and autocracy and corruption around the globe, and it focuses on the international dark economy through which very often Western rule of law nations support and sustain the kleptocracy, autocracy, and criminality that is the bane of our existence, if not our outright enemy. And I'm wondering if you can assure me how effectively the State Department at this point has connected the dots between the Democracy Initiative, the international dark money economy that supports it, and your purview of illicit finance supporting the international narcotics trade.
Thank you so much, Senator, for that question. We are focused on working with our interagency partners and our international partners to make sure we're creating effective structures around the world to go after these transnational organized criminals and specifically their assets. We continue to work with the UN, we continue to work with the G20, we continue to work with FATF to make sure that we are working with our partner governments to create the structures and create the networks among our partner governments to go after this illicit finance.
And the places that allow or encourage illicit funds to be held and hidden are an important infrastructure for the narcotics trafficking interest to dispose of, invest, and hide its corrupt proceeds, correct?
That's correct. And that's why we take very seriously our engagement with important countries in the region. So I traveled to Mexico with Undersecretary Nelson as my first trip in this job. I've just recently traveled to Asia and had discussions about this in Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. And found them to be willing partners in our effort to go after trafficking across the board. And I 2 weeks ago just came back from Pakistan, where again I engaged with our partners in Pakistan to focus on working with their agencies and their structures so that we can monitor better the illicit financing that is happening.
Well, I'll wrap up by turning it over to Co-Chair Grassley, but with the observation that there is a common thread through a lot of the evil in the world, and it is the dark economy that supports the evildoers' ability to hide the assets that they've either extracted wrongfully from their country or taken in bribes or earned through criminal proceeds. And I think we've got to see that network as a target in its own right. And if we can fix that, like in Star Wars, they took out the Death Star and everything else got better. we need to go after the dark money Death Star, and I hope you continue to pursue that. Co-Chair Grassley.
First of all, I want to apologize to my colleagues and to the witnesses. I have a freeze problem on my end here with this instrument. So if that happens, it's about 10 seconds you tend to lose till it straightens itself out. So be patient if I stop in the middle of my questions to you. Ambassador Robinson, I thank you for being here today. The relationship between China and Mexico with regard to illicit drug is very evident. China-based criminals make money by shipping precursor chemicals to Mexico, where they're made into fentanyl and shipped into our country. What is the extent of the Chinese criminal organization relationship with the Mexican cartel, and why is it important for policymakers to understand China's role, including any involvement by the Chinese government as part of the economics of cartels?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. First of all, I think we have to be careful about linking the Chinese government with Chinese cartels and Mexican cartels. I don't think we've made that direct link yet. But you are absolutely right. There is no doubt Chinese transnational organized crime, criminal organizations are working with Mexican criminal organizations and probably other criminal organizations to move precursors from China, often through some of our partner countries, like, as I mentioned earlier, Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos, to Mexico. There is no doubt the Chinese government is not doing enough to monitor these precursor chemicals, to schedule these precursor chemicals, and to know who's collecting the precursor chemicals on the other end in Mexico. We continue to try to engage with the Chinese government on this. They have sort of been reluctant to engage with us, but we keep at it. We are in very close discussions with the Mexican government. In fact, as you know, Mexican President Lopez Obrador is in town today and tomorrow. The bicentennial framework, which we've worked out, which was worked out partially with our colleagues at the Department of Treasury, allows us to do so much more on synthetic drugs, attacking synthetic drugs the way we attacked plant-based drugs and money laundering under Merida, and also gives us an opportunity to work more closely on the southwest border with our Mexican contacts. So you are absolutely right. The Chinese are not doing enough. The Chinese government's not doing enough. The Chinese cartels are working with Mexican cartels, and we are working closely with Mexico, trying to engage more with China on this issue.
Do you have any suggestions of any steps Congress should take to help you with this problem?
No, I think Congress has actually done a very good job in supporting us in this effort. What I would say is, and you've probably heard this a lot from those of us in INL, flexibility with the resources you graciously give us is key, and our ability to move money around to programs and projects quickly could always be more helpful.
Also to you, Ambassador Robin, cartels across the globe fuel corruption in our developing nations to launder their money. Young democratic governments and judicial systems often fail to address this issue due to lack of capacity. China's global reach and international influence is extensive, especially in developing worlds of South and Southeast Asia. INL's support of the Department of Justice OPDET and ICTAP programs is critical to building anti-money laundering capacity in these regions. What is the INL doing to ensure that OPDET and ICTAP programs are being used in the best way to combat money laundering and related corruption in the developing world, especially in Southeast Asia? How can these programs be improved, if at all?
Thank you again, Senator. The INL is working very closely with OPDAT and ICTAP on programs, again, in the countries that I mentioned, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. We work very closely. We have great programming in those countries. We're also expanding our programming in Mexico, in Central America, all with the aim of increasing the capacity of our partner countries to monitor illicit financing and anti-money laundering. We will continue to support our colleagues in the Department of Justice at OPDAT and ICTAP in those endeavors. We're also, I should mention, we have great programming in the Caribbean. We have noticed increased activity by Chinese transnational organized criminal networks in the Caribbean. OPDAT and ICTAP are there. We are working hand in hand to make sure that we are working with our Caribbean partners to go after these networks.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, my time's up. I have some questions I'll submit to Undersecretary Nelson for answer in writing.
Our other colleagues who are present have signed off, so it's just the two of us. If you want to do another round, I've got a couple of questions that I'll ask, if that's all right.
Could I do one question to Undersecretary?
Right now, sure. You
Nelson?
go ahead.
And then I'll have to go to the floor to vote. I thank you, Mr. Nelson, for coming. You hold an important role in our fight against illicit drug use by removing financial incentives to deal. In addition to drug enforcement, investigating and prosecuting money laundering crimes will help to reduce the profit that accompanies drug trafficking. This focus is critical to our nation experiencing record-breaking overdose of deaths. We know that as money laundering laws become stricter, cartels are forced to become more creative and sophisticated in the way that they launder this money. So I'd like to know your views on whether bulk cash smuggling remains common. In what ways have the financial networks of drug cartels become more sophisticated in trying to avoid law enforcement, particularly with technological advancements and automation?
Thank you for that question, and totally agree with you that this continues to be an incredibly dynamic problem set that we're facing, and we see the incredible consequences of this illegal drug trade and use of not only our financial system, but in the international financial system in order to support it. I would say we are still seeing traditional money laundering techniques, as you noted, like cash-based transfers. But that being said, we are starting to see drug traffickers use new technologies to skirt our AML laws. Particularly, we're seeing drug trafficking organizations and other transnational criminal organizations becoming more comfortable with the so-called darknet markets and use of virtual currency to launder funds. Although, again, sort of the size and scope of the proceeds that are generated on those platforms remain relatively low just in comparison to cash. So we are looking closely in that vein at sort of illicit financing risks that we face in the context of virtual assets. And given that there's a lack of international implementation of AML CFT standards across virtual assets, how we can work with partner countries in order to create consistency in our AML CFT obligations for virtual assets, which will be incredibly important. And we, as the Treasury Department, have sanctioned a number of key nodes within that ecosystem, including including virtual asset service providers, darknet markets, including those associated with Russia and other types of nodes like mixers that are designed to, or at least in practice, can sort of obtuse and prevent us from being able to identify the beneficial, effectively owner of that particular virtual asset. So we are working hard in this area because we do view it as a source of significant risk, and look forward to continuing to obviously work with Congress on not only in sort of identifying the risk, but identifying tools, techniques, and solutions going forward.
This will be my last question. How are FinCEN and the Office of Foreign Asset Control adapting their approaches to combat these new threats?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot in that vein. So FinCEN recently released an advisory on illicit activity involving convertible virtual currency. Happily, FinCEN, if I can say, I think is sort of within our government been really the leader on this issue, because they've been looking at virtual assets going back to I believe 2014. So it's been almost a decade. And as you know, under the Anti-Money Laundering Act, it clarified that virtual assets were also subject to supervision by FinCEN as effectively as a fiat currency. So these are going to be really important tools in our ability, and my team at FinCEN's ability to regulate this space.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to sign off now.
Thank you, Co-Chair Grassley. I'll follow up on Senator Grassley's last question by inquiring with respect to the Chinese money laundering activities. You mentioned bulk cash, darknet, cryptocurrencies, and other methods. Or have you been able to use sanctions against any Chinese money laundering organizations?
Yeah, as part of the new executive order that the president signed in December of last year, our first sort of tranche of designation was related to these Chinese-based entities that are sending precursor chemicals to Mexico, as well as the financial infrastructure that supports that. So that's been a focus in terms of the virtual asset space. As you know, virtual coins are now illegal in China. So you see less of that type of engagement in China as opposed to other parts of the world.
Ambassador Robinson,
Senator, I just wanted to chime in on the end of that. We are working very closely with OPGAT globally to help train governments on money laundering techniques using cryptocurrency. So,
the Chinese government.
I'm sorry?
The Chinese government you're training.
No, our partner government. So in Vietnam, in Laos, in Thailand, in Panama in particular, we have a 5-year program helping them work with their financial intelligence unit.
Because my understanding is that the Chinese government has not been very helpful about addressing money laundering concerns.
That is correct.
The bicentennial framework helps coordinate our efforts with Mexico. Have you seen any progress under that framework in dealing with financial networks of Mexican cartels?
The Mexicans have gone after financial and money laundering cartels very aggressively. And some of that has been because of our engagement through the bicentennial framework. I would also add, though, that they're not doing it out of altruistic reasons. There is a growing demand for the drugs that are being sent to the United States in Mexico. They recognize that. They understand the challenges they face with that. They see it happening in our country. And so it is in their interest to go after these networks. And I would argue that they're doing so aggressively.
Good. Last question, and for both of you, I'm trying to continue to build a record for the Enablers Act. It is part of the 2021 United States Strategy on Countering Corruption to make sure that what is called by that strategy key gatekeepers to the financial system cannot evade scrutiny. We all know that if you're a bank, you have to follow robust anti-money laundering procedures, and that banks have gotten readily accustomed to following those. But all you have to do is go across the street to the investment advisor, and you can do all the things that would be illegal if done with a bank, with the investment advisor or with a realtor or through a law firm. And how important do you think it is for Congress to give you the tools to expand beyond just the banking industry and apply anti-money laundering authorities to all these other key gatekeepers? Undersecretary first, then we'll close out with Ambassador Robinson, and I'll go vote.
Very good, and absolutely look forward to continue to work with you on this question. We absolutely agree that there are financial intermediaries, gatekeepers, and the like that are obviously not covered by comprehensive AML/CFT obligations, and we are looking at this question in particular very closely, as you can imagine, with new urgency and I think a new spotlight in the context of what we're seeing out of our Russia elites, proxies, and oligarchs work, and the international task force that we created in support of that, as well as in consistent with the strategy on countering corruption that the administration
No doubt
put out
whatsoever
last
that
year.
the key gatekeepers should be covered.
And one of the things that we're doing, as you are aware, we have the authority to issue regulations to extend BSA obligations to investment advisors. So that's something that we're actively looking at in terms of a new rulemaking.
Well, I'd encourage you to proceed with vigor and dispatch. Ambassador Robinson, same question.
Totally agree with my colleague at Treasury. We think it's important to go after the middlemen, the enablers. The administration's executive order expanding on the Kingpin Act allows us to do that, and we are all for it.
Great. Well, we'll continue to try to provide you the authorities and the resources you need. I'll close with where I began, which is that I think that the international dark economy as a network, as a piece of infrastructure, is a very dangerous thing. It enables conduct that is antithetical, anathema even, to our values and to our national security. And yet, a considerable number of American and other rule of law country professionals engage in this conduct because we have not stopped them. And in that sense, we, the rule of law countries, are giving aid and comfort to our enemies in a clash of values that often results in actual kinetic harm in places like, we're seeing it in Ukraine right now, but there are many other places where a lot of cruelty and violence takes place because this conduct is facilitated by our side of the rule of law versus non-rule of law world. So thanks very much for your efforts to fight this from the front lines, and we'll try to keep sending you authorities and resources.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
The hearing is concluded. My virtual gavel falls, and anybody who has any questions will have to file them as questions for the record, and we'd ask you to respond promptly to them as and if received.
Of course.
Thanks very much, both.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.